Welcome back to the NASA Citizen Science Community Workshop Series. I'm your host, Sarah Kern from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. We'll begin with some reminders. First, please use the chat to introduce yourselves if you've not done so already. If you find that chat distracting or annoying, you can minimize it, close it, or move it aside. Please note that the chat default is to send your chats to panelists only. Please use the blue box above where you type your message to redirect your comments to where you want them to go. Please use the Q&A tool, which you'll find in the footer next to the chat tool, to submit questions for our panelists. You can now vote for questions in the Q&A tool or comment on them. If a question seems to vanish, look at the top of the Q&A window for tabs to access answered questions. It's probably there. What a great presentation and discussion we had with Dr. Julia Parrish from the COAST program last time. I hope her words and insights have been echoing around in your heads and thinking like they have in mine. Once again, Dr. Marc Kushner is going to join me for a little collaborative reflection. Marc, thanks for joining us again. We wanted to have a conversation about scale and thinking about growing projects. And to me, there's a couple elements to think about here. There's one, how do we reach new audiences? And then how do we train those new audiences to be ready to participate well in the projects that they're interested in? And it seems like there's actually two aspects of that training, right? There's learning the skills that they need to be able to be successful at whatever task they're being asked to do. But then in that training, there's also a real human element where those people are being introduced to a community, introduced to something that's new to them potentially. And how do we make that training experience something that's welcoming and motivating? And then how do we do all of that at scale?
Wow, there's a lot to that. Yeah, training is really at the heart of citizen science, isn't it? And it can serve, as we heard from Julia, multiple purposes. It can be a introduction to the specific science, to the very nature of doing science, right? Your zeros count. And it can be an introduction to a community that maybe you didn't realize that you could be part of. And that takes special care to do right as well. And on the one hand, we have projects like COAST where there are professional trainers who are working with people in their communities one-on-one. And then the opposite extreme, we have projects that have an online tutorial, right? And you might not ever get to have a real-time conversation with a human, depending on how you interact. And I think the path forward for citizen science has to lie somewhere in bridging that space between the intimate and the personalized and the easily scalable and automated.
Yes, and I think it's also important to remember too the really different nature of different citizen science projects. And I certainly like talking with people. I like talking with you. I like talking on these webinars. But for some people, having a face-to-face interaction may in fact be more intimidating than learning something online. And that may be generational, it may be cultural, it may be just really personal. So I think there's also some opportunities for projects to think about the kinds of people that they want to reach, or creating opportunities for certain kinds of people who may find different avenues into citizen science welcoming. And then there's the wonderful idea that, or the pattern that she uncovered and others have uncovered, that once someone is actually participating in a citizen science project, they're more likely to join another citizen science project. So there's that step, like how do you bring new folks into citizen science as a practice and then support their movement among projects, and the associated training that has to come along with getting up to speed to participate in a new project.
Yeah, Darlene and the SciStarter crew have mentioned that typically people participate typically in 3 citizen science projects. So one project is a gateway for another. I like also how Julia mentioned that there are different channels of communication that people prefer, that to reach some participants, and maybe this is a generational thing, it works better to call them on the phone, right? So it's possible that by limiting yourself to one kind of training, whether it's online or in person, that you could be losing people who aren't as responsive to that channel of communication.
Right. Yeah, it's complex to try and think about being all things to all people, no matter what they want. And maybe all projects can't be that. But different projects could fill in different, could create different bridges for new folks to enter into the practice of citizen science.
Maybe this is something that we could, maybe this is something we can be learning from these COVID times, right? When we're all exploring new channels of communication by necessity. We're learning how to have meetings by video conference, and we're learning to spell things out more in file share mechanisms and so on. And I suspect that right now Julia's team is improving a new kind of training out of necessity, and maybe our projects will all expand as a result. Oh.
Right. And just like some teachers are talking about how this homeschooling scenario is actually benefiting some students who'd been struggling in classrooms, this weird COVID time may be opening up participation for people who hadn't participated in citizen science projects before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to learn more about what's happening. We need to knock on the door of a few social scientists who are looking at that and find out what they're learning. We have a panel today about new technology and citizen science. Maybe they'll have some insight for us in new technology for training citizen science in addition to doing citizen science. So let's move on to our panel. Thank you, Marc, for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's always fun.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Technology and citizen science have been evolving together in a kind of dance for decades. Communication technology has provided unprecedented tools for supporting and coordinating the collective action at the heart of citizen science projects. NASA rockets and satellites bring and send unprecedented data sets back to Earth. Even the digital cameras in our phones have revolutionized data collection by citizen scientists. Today's panel will explore some of the new technology becoming available and already integrated with new and old favorite citizen science projects. Leading today's panel is Dr. Heather Fischer, Senior Researcher at the STEM Research Center at Oregon State University. Heather has experience leading citizen science projects, participating in citizen science projects herself. She brings both these perspectives to her work as an evaluator of citizen science projects, asking questions and collecting and analyzing data, all to reveal insights and patterns that can be used to improve citizen science projects. She's doing a similar service for this summer series. So please be sure to respond to any surveys she sends out to you. It will only help us serve you better. Heather, take it away.
So we're going to focus on new technology that's being used in citizen science. And we have 4 great panelists today. We're going to talk about new technology and how they're employing it in different stages of their projects. For example, we're going to start out with talking about new technology in the data collection phase. So we have Holli Kohl from Globe Observer. She's going to talk about using photos as data. We also have Ved Chirayath from NeMO-Net, who's going to talk about the video game style platform he has for volunteers to collect data for his project. And then we'll also have a lot of discussion about the role of machine learning algorithms in citizen science. We have Carlos Siordia from the CDC is going to talk about a crowdsourcing competition he helped host that uses machine learning to classify occupational work-related injury records. And then lastly, we're going to touch on new developments in data sharing and developing open data platforms. We had Ted Smith from the University of Louisville to talk about the Louisville Data Commons, which is an open data platform. And we also want to hear from you. I know many of you are interested in machine learning, especially, and probably have a lot of experience. So if you have any innovations you want to talk about that your project has adapted or developed, then please post any resources in the chat, ask questions in the Q&A, and then also make sure you utilize our Slack platform to share resources as well. So let's get things started with Holli. So Holli has been working with Globe Observer. And Holli, can you talk about some of the phenomenon that you've been capturing with photos using the Globe Observer mobile application and how you're using technology to gather data from the photos?
Sure. So thank you for inviting me here. It's really great to be part of this panel, and I'm looking forward to learning from everybody. So Globe Observer came out of the Globe program. The Globe program started in the mid-1990s as a student and science program. And to participate in Globe, at that point, you needed really extensive training. You had to have specific scientific instruments to collect and gather data. And data were collected by students, supervised by trained teachers. And so all that data were collected offline and written down on a paper-based data collection. And photos were auxiliary data, supporting data. In 2015, 2016, when we started developing Globe Observer, the goal was to open up the Globe program and make it accessible to more people. So we wanted to lower that barrier to entry. And we wanted to move the data collection into a smartphone format because more people have access to smartphones than specialized equipment. So we started using the technology for uniform data collection to guide people through the process of collecting data. And there is no external equipment. So you don't have to have a thermometer or a clinometer or anything like that to take environmental observations with Observer. When we started in 2016, our first protocol that we integrated into the app was the Clouds protocol. And in that, we asked people to go out and observe the sky and tell us about sky color and cloud cover and cloud types, and then being guided through the process. And then at the end, photograph their sky facing north, south, east, west. We integrated the phone's compass and the gyroscope to ensure that the photos were facing all the cardinal directions and that the angle was the same on all photos submitted. And those photos served as verification. So by 2018, when we developed our land cover protocol, which was the third one to go into our app, those photos took the role of being the primary data collection mechanism. In land cover, we ask people to go to a location, get their latitude and longitude with the app, and then take photos north, south, east, west, and that's the data collection. As an optional secondary thing, they can go in and classify the photos and tell us what's in them in terms of land cover. So that leads us to a really interesting place. As you see in the slide, we have more than 1 million georeferenced photos in our database now. And so what do you do with all of those photos? Our science users do prefer data that includes photos for reference or verification. But yet up to 68% of cloud photos and down to 13% of our mosquito photos, which is our second protocol, those are classified. So there's a huge percentage of our photos that are not classified and therefore not searchable. If you're looking for, everything that includes a picture of a forest or, a particular, type of water body or whatever, you can't search those easily. And so what we're looking at is how do you get into those photos and pull that really useful data out that we know our scientists want. Additionally, the analysis of this 1 million photo database could help us resolve quality flags in the existing data. And we recently published a paper about that, and the reference is there on this slide. So we're looking at various forms of technology that I'm excited to talk about today. One of them has been discussed in a prior workshop, in the data matchup workshop, where we're looking at matching, or where we have been matching satellite data to the clouds photos and cloud data. But we're also looking at using artificial intelligence to screen photos for privacy and also to help fill in some of those gaps in the classification. And then the third way that I think will be really interesting to integrate technology is to use technology to enable secondary photo classification from other citizen scientists, maybe in the style of Zooniverse. So we're really excited to explore those options.
Great, thank you, Holli. And we'll get in more machine learning talk soon here. So next up we have Carlos. So Carlos is hosting a crowdsourcing competitions to improve a learning algorithm used by the CDC's National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. So Carlos, can you talk to us a little bit about how your team decided that crowdsourcing was the right approach to your project?
Yes, thank you, Heather. And just want to say that I'm really honored to be in today's panel. I'm excited to hear about all their work. They're doing outstanding work, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys. Before I answer your question, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. The opinions I express belong to me. They do not necessarily represent the official positions of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So in answer to your question, I'm trained as a sociologist and epidemiologist. I've worked both in academia and the federal government for many years now. And I believe that science belongs to everyone, in that innovation should be decentralized. I think that we should help embrace the view that people outside of our institutions should be invited to create solutions with us. I was able to find 17 other people from 7 different federal agencies, as you can see on the slide, who share some of these views. We basically, the reason why we chose crowdsourcing is that we wanted to find a scalable and sustainable solution. As many of you already know, the federal government has been collaborating with external partners in using machine learning for many decades. Our agency had found a solution for processing unstructured text from surveillance data. The solution was machine learning, something called natural language processing. We were curious if we could improve the performance of our statistical algorithm, and we knew that the government had been encouraging the use of crowdsourcing for many years. For example, it established NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation in 2011. So we decided that crowdsourcing, a better solution to our problem, was the best avenue. We made this decision based on 2 views. First, crowdsourcing would provide us with an opportunity to engage other machine learning developers within our agency to ensure that we had the best CDC model possible before we went to the public. And second, we knew that the international community had extremely talented developers. So crowdsourcing provided us with an opportunity to invite the world to help us improve our existing solution. And this is why our team decided that crowdsourcing was the right approach for our project. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Carlos. So next up we have Ved. Ved is the PI for NeMO-Net, and then he's also the director of the NASA Laboratory for Advanced Sensing. So Ved, you're in charge of a lot of great things. And how do you think citizen science advances your work that you do in your lab?
Thank you, Heather, and thanks again for having me on this panel. It's really exciting to hear all these different applications, because sometimes we get siloed in our science fields looking at one thing. For us, really, citizen science was the solution to a problem that was sort of intractable. My lab at NASA, we invent new instruments for the agency, trying to look forward 10, 20 years about, what is the next generation technologies that will enable us to understand our planet and the universe. One of the startling facts I learned when I was, moving from astrophysics into earth science, which are very different fields, was just that as of 2020, we've still only mapped about 6% of the ocean floor. And it's the largest ecosystem on our planet. It controls our climate. It controls everything. It's kind of shocking. Just from a NASA point of view, where we look for life elsewhere, 99% of the habitable volume on Earth is in the ocean. And so the main focus of my lab really just became developing technologies to map the ocean. And then the challenge that we are trying to solve with citizen science is, once you have instruments that can see through the water to get underneath and to map some of the ocean floor, what do you do with all of that data? It's a really big data challenge. And if you just think of the volume of data we have now to study the land surface of Earth, take that problem and multiply it by an order of magnitude or 2, and now you're talking about the ocean system. So I can give a quick overview of what NeMO-Net is. NeMO-Net stands for the Fluid Lensing Neural Network for Global Coral Reef Assessment. And it's based on this instrument I'm showing called FluidCam. This is a CubeSat style sensor that can look through ocean waves. One of the biggest challenges we have right now, as you can see in this animation, is looking through the ocean surface. It's really complicated fluid to look through, and it distorts our view of what we see underwater. As of 2020, we're mapping the ocean, but really just at the top surface of the ocean where light penetrates. And then everything we see under the ocean surface is distorted by the presence of ocean waves. And that can, for studying something like coral reefs, really be the biggest obstacle into looking at how they're changing over time. If you look up on your phone and you just zoom in on a beach somewhere and look at something underwater and scroll through time, you'll notice that on the beach, items seem to be stationary. You can look at a beach umbrella, stay in one spot over time. But in the water, things appear to be moving around. And that's not because they're actually moving in a lot of cases. It's just that our satellites and our aircraft are viewing those objects from different viewpoints. And refraction, which we learn about in high school, is causing that light to get bent. And so as a result, it's really hard for us to track anything, even in the shallow regions of our planet's oceans, to see how they're changing. So the fluid cam is really the first instrument here that I'm showing that can remove that distortion and actually get really deep in the water column and create pretty advanced 3D models. So here you can see our drone flying around with the instrument, and it's mapping through the ocean surface, through those waves that form lenses. And so that's why it's called fluid lensing. They can actually magnify what we see on the benthic surface. And we're using it here to reveal corals in 3D at the sub-centimeter scale. So it's really a diver scale view of a system that's quite large. Normally in marine biology, it takes a few months to survey a system this big. With divers, this aircraft can do it in a day, and we're trying to advance technology to go further. The challenge, however, with these huge 3D data sets is you need to have someone go in there and classify what they're seeing. Now, when I first approached this problem, I thought it would be pretty simple. There are tools out there, particularly in citizen science, that have users contribute to these classifications. But it wasn't until I started diving these systems extensively did I appreciate that coral reefs, which are the main system of focus right now, because they're so impacted by climate change, they have a biodiversity that's just off the scale. So if you look at 1 square meter of the Amazon rainforest, you're looking at maybe 10 species. In a coral reef, it's usually 100 times that number of species per square meter. So the challenges for studying that system, particularly from the coarse scale of a satellite or an aircraft, is that not only do you have a huge amount of complicated structures in one area, but you need to study it at that scale to make any useful interpretations of the data. And what we've learned through this instrument is that it's not sufficient to just look at 2D data. You really have to have a 3D view of the coral to understand its total shape, its structure, its area, how healthy it is. And then to track that over time is another challenge. You have to look at the change in that 3D structure. So I'll show a short video about NeMO-Net here.
What if you could help NASA create a map of the ocean floor with just the tip of your finger? The ocean, teeming with life. It defines our blue planet, drives our ecosystem, and regulates our climate. Coral reefs are one of the most diverse and important systems in the ocean. They're also becoming an important source of medicines for some of the world's deadliest diseases. But they are dying at unprecedented rates due to rising temperatures. But we don't know how much we're losing or how much our climate is changing. We can't, until we determine how much healthy reef exists now. And the only way we can know that is with your help. NASA NeMO-Net is a game where you classify the world's coral reefs by painting on real-life images scanned from the ocean floor using a revolutionary instrument that lets us see beneath the waves at unprecedented resolutions. Our oceans are so vast, it would take us 2 million years to classify the world's coral reefs by hand. The classifications you create are sent to our teams of NASA scientists at home base to teach our supercomputer to classify coral reefs on a global scale. Every contribution you make brings us closer to solving this problem. Join the NASA team to help us understand these amazing ecosystems. Take command of your research vessel and learn about all the different types of coral. We must keep the ocean alive. It supports our life as we know it. Together, we can create a global data set of coral reefs and build a better understanding of how to save these aquatic worlds, one piece of coral at a time. Good luck, and welcome to the NASA NeMO-Net team.
NeMO-Net takes all of that 3D data from our aircraft, all of the data we get also from divers that have gone out and mapped these areas with cameras creating 3D models. And it merges it into an interactive video game that's tied to the NASA supercomputer here at Ames in Silicon Valley. So the data sets are huge. They're about 150 terabytes in size, sometimes just for a few islands. And we can't process all of that data. We have armies of graduate students and undergraduates classifying, but it's really not enough. So in NeMO-Net, we created it actually started off as a machine learning tool for the NASA supercomputer to take in data, advanced 3D data like we were generating from FluidCam, and try to start classifying it automatically. And then we learned very quickly you need training data to provide the supercomputer with a good enough model to do all of that classification. And then we learned for corals, it's not sufficient to just put it out there and have people classify. You've got to train them. Even seasoned marine biologists struggle with classifying if something is living coral or dead coral, or if it's not coral at all, it's a tire covered in algae that's fooling you into thinking it is a coral. So NeMO-Net introduces the users one by one to different classes of coral, and you rank up in the food chain, and it's become sort of an interactive game. And we were just blown away by the level of enthusiasm by the players. It's funny, it's often not the leading marine biologists that are doing the best classifications in NeMO-Net, it's their children. And they have just such an untapped potential of accuracy, energy, motivation. They're really excited by it. And so, we've been really lucky and fortunate to just have hundreds of thousands of active users contributing 3D data that are helping us map corals one at a time, and then also just develop these models that we can expand globally and understand how our ocean system is changing, the rate at which it's changing. And for a lot of people, it just gives them the first view they've ever had of a coral reef. We have sort of as bipeds privilege in being able to just walk into a national park and see for ourselves what it means to be in nature, what it means to have that resource, and how it's changing as we see fires take over an environment or disturbance happen. For the ocean, it's really hard to get there. It could be socioeconomic, you're not able to actually reach that area. It could just be that it's dangerous to go in the water, so you may not want to be in the water. And so this is giving kind of a view to folks, particularly in island nations, of the state of their reef and how that's changing.
That's great. It makes me want to go scuba diving right now. Too bad we can't really travel. So last but not least, we have Ted Smith from the University of Louisville School of Medicine and Louisville Data Commons. So Ted, can you talk about how the Data Commons was designed to be accessible by the public, and what went into thinking about the design for an open data platform?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. It's a great group. Really looking forward to the discussion. Our journey might not strike anybody as extremely high tech at first blush, but I guess I just want to remind everybody that we didn't think hand washing was so important until recently. So sometimes simple things are very, very powerful. So our story with our data commons actually started out with a crowdsourced mobile app to report odors. And it's a partnership between our university and Carnegie Mellon. And in the environmental justice community, there are often concerns, especially where there are industrial polluters, about the level of monitoring that goes on. And there definitely are gaps in spatial and temporal resolution in that monitoring. And so we thought, well, this is great. We're going to roll out this app, and people can report the odors. And when I met with many of the different community leaders in these affected communities, the very first thing that they said is, we want to know where the data is going. Like, we're not going to use your app until you tell us where the data is going. And I guess I'd never really envisioned a situation where somebody would say, well, I'm not going to report this thing, right, until you sort of answer these questions. And I couldn't be more grateful, because the issue was that there's a great history of reporting these essentially to regulatory agencies, and then sort of unbelievable stories of incomplete follow-up or incomplete record keeping, and then systemic distrust. And so we sort of took a step back from this wonderful idea of everybody can crowdsource this sort of odor reporting, and we said, well, what if we stood up a place that you were in charge of, a community governed data resource? And so that's exactly what we did with this data commons. We plugged this app into an open data data warehouse that is governed by a 7 community member board. And any decisions about what gets added, what gets deleted, anything that's modified is a decision made by the community that governs it. And that just has opened the door for us to a wide number of other applications where any kind of citizen science has a home in this. I like to think of it as a third place. So it's not the government's data portal, it's not a vendor's data portal, it is the community's data portal. And if it's data about the community that the community gathered, it's governed and managed by the community. So we're really excited about this small, but we think powerful notion in the whole open data citizen science movement.
Great, thank you. So your discussion about the trust of the data got me thinking about trust and privacy issues. And when you have new technology being utilized in anywhere, but especially in citizen science, it kind of creates this black box where a lot of people don't understand where their data is going and who's getting it. So I think I'll start with Holli first, because she talked about the AI to protect privacy with the glove photos, but then open this question up for the rest of you. But what are your projects doing as far as privacy policy issues, thinking about data trust and eliminating that black box of technology for the citizen scientists?
Yeah, so Globe Observer, when a person submits a photo, it's geotagged with the location of where that person was. And that observation includes, if that observation includes the name of the person with the location and the photo, that becomes personally identifiable information, which is regulated. And so it means it requires special handling, and you have to think about privacy and protecting people. So what we do is we strip the person's name off the data. That causes problems, other problems. People want to be able to see themselves in the data, and they want to be able to recognize what they have contributed. We get around that by assigning a unique user ID number that only the end user has access to. So nobody else can see it apart from the database managers. So that's how we try to protect their privacy, is the location is there, their photo is there. But the other issue, though, is that the photos, if they contain a recognizable face or text that would connect a person to that location, we try to be super, super sensitive to those sorts of things. Globe started as a student-based program, so a lot of the participants are underage, under the age of 13. And so we want to be really careful that any children's faces or that identifiable text is just not there. What we're doing currently is somebody on our team reviews every single photo that comes in. So 1 million photos, somebody in our team has looked at every single one and made sure that those things are not there. And if they are, we pull the photo and it never makes it to the database. We just keep them in a separate spot. We're working on implementing AI technology. We're using Amazon recognition to identify faces, identify text, and blur those out. So those photos can now go into the database with those identifiable features removed. So we're in testing phase right now, and we're hoping to be able to implement it pretty soon.
Anybody else want to respond about privacy and trust?
We also have a similar issue where we don't want folks to be identifiable, and we want to randomize a lot of the data sets. Mm-hmm. And so when you start the game, you do create another username. They're randomly generated, and you can keep re-rolling the dice to get a good one. Mine's Major Narwhal Gastropod, I believe. I'm not the highest rank, but the only thing that users can kind of see is how they rank globally, and what their username is doing in terms of ranking. But essentially, they're contributing painting data and on coloring. So it's kind of soothing activity for adults and kind of fun for kids. And then they're able to also rate other users' inputs, which is one way in which we filter out a lot of folks writing, just painting names on corals or other such things. Those sort of get down selected by the algorithm, and then they get filtered out of the neural network. So it is, for all government projects, I think, really valuable and powerful that these data sets are provided publicly as a resource. This is, again, taxpayer-funded work, and I, as a taxpayer myself, I love to see that it's there, and that there's really strong policies to protect people's PII, personally identifiable information, as well as sharing that data for years to come, because someone else may come along with new tools in the future and be able to harvest more information from that data, as long as it's maintained and provided for lots of time.
And Heather, if I could add something else that I don't think has been mentioned in terms of things to look out for, and if there's an identifiable entity within the surveillance systems that we were using, because we're looking at work-related injuries, we are having to keep an eye out for the unstructured text where a company is named or a product. If you can think of something specific like some type of robotic surgery robot or something like that, any type of product name or company, for our purposes, those are the types of things that when we go to make data public, we need to keep an eye out to exclude and not allow for the company or the product to be identified. And of course, like it's been mentioned, even those narratives may sometimes include the name of the individual that was hurt in the work event. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that there's also other things besides individuals that are contributing information that in some instances need to be blocked out if something is made public.
So I always like to hear about people's failures. So I'm hoping some of you will have some great stories about some failures or some challenges about implementing your projects, implementing new technology in your projects, any pushback you've gotten from superiors or other folks on your team about doing citizen science, doing a new project or integrating a new bit of technology into your project. So I love to hear stories about people's failures.
For me, one of the things that I think when I started, there was several things that were going through my mind, and several of the team members that I was working with. We were the first to conduct kind of a month-long intramural crowdsourcing competition before going out to have a company host the public competition. And one of the things that stood out to me when we started doing the intramural competition, I reached out to several other federal agencies, people that had done these types of things. And one of the things that they encouraged me to do was to really do this intramural competition. And one of the reasons why they did that was because some of them had not done it. And when they did the extramural competition, they got some feedback from their agency asking, why didn't you ask us? We have talented people inside our agency. We could have probably done the same thing here internally. So when we started our project and we did the intramural competition, I ran into some of that. I'm grateful that the CDC as a whole, people within this space are very open source minded. So didn't get a lot of pushback, but certainly a lot of questions in terms of, do we really need to go out and ask people outside of our walls? We have a lot of talented individuals that have been doing this work for years. Surely we can develop the best algorithm. And as our competition showed, we're able to improve on the performance of the algorithm that we had developed internally. But I think that simple of the idea of accepting that there's a lot of intelligent people outside our institutions, that in of itself, even though it's subtle, it can be something that is very sensitive. And for me, at least, it was something that I had to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I could share no shortage of failures on on projects. I feel like science is just all failure until you get something working, and then suddenly, people pay attention.
Exactly.
Yeah, so NeMO-Net was a 3-year technology development that's now like 4 years long, and 2 of those first years were just developing the black box machine learning neural networks behind the scenes that operate all of us. And that is, just 2 years of failing and implementing all of these really advanced strategies that are used in advertising, but now, adapting them for earth science and trying to go from the centimeter scale 3D model of a coral to the satellite view at the 10-meter scale. I mean, that's multiple orders of magnitude in resolution, and it's just really hard to train something that's robust to that. So that was, huge number of failures at the beginning, and then lots of success where we got an algorithm that was working very well. And then the second challenge is just in the marine biology community, there's a huge amount of, I think, quite warranted skepticism when it comes to citizen scientists, essentially anybody, coming in and saying, okay, I think I can classify this highly complex ecosystem, having no knowledge of what algae or coral or different types of sedimentary structures look like. And I'm not immune to this. I struggled with this, and I'd often have some of my, we partnered with scientists around the world to basically provide critical feedback and say, where are we failing? Where can we do better? And we started adapting the algorithm for doing what we call active learning, where if there is a discrepancy among different users, that section of coral is now farmed out to even more users. And we build up a lot of statistics to try to understand how confident that classification can be. And there's a lot of screening that's done to kind of essentially bear and show that we are now at the end of the day classifying coral at a rate that is greater than or equal to a human expert in the field. And that's kind of the gold standard, but it's something that is born out of tremendous numbers of failures, and I think very useful constructive feedback from scientists to just say, look, this isn't sufficient. You've got to train people to learn what to do when they see this. And again, there's it's still hard when you've got two PhD scientists saying, I think that there's this algae, and this guy says, no, it's this encrusting other thing, and that it's sometimes only resolved from the computer side, where the computer says, okay, here's a probability it's this, and here's a probability it's that. And I think that that's a healthy process, as difficult as it can be. And I think it's something that a lot of other citizen scientists share in just the scientific community, being able to view the work with credibility and confidence that matches something you would see in particle physics, for example.
Heather, I think one of the challenges that we had is that we're not controlling the technology, right? When we first started developing Globe Observer in 2015, Google had announced there were 24,000 different types of Android devices on the market. And imagine developing an app that works uniformly across 24,000 Android devices. And then we're going to add in the iPhone too. And so that was a major challenge for us. So today the Globe Observer is used on 2,750 different types of devices. And they're not all the same. We're trying to tap into the phone's camera, the compass, and the gyroscope when we're taking the photographic data. And those devices aren't the same across the board. And so we have to figure out how to work with each one of them. And then even just a small change in, say, the Android operating system, you can ask me how I know this, can totally break your project. In 2017, Android changed a little thing, and all of a sudden, no Android device was really compatible with the compass and the photo tool in Globe Observer. So we had to drop everything and focus all of our energy in rebuilding the app to work on Android again. So it's really challenging when you don't control the technology that's running your project, and you have to code defensively. You have to really think ahead and try to figure out what's going to fail and where, and it's difficult
like defensive
to do.
Driving, but defensive coding.
Yeah, exactly, defensive coding. And you have to keep evolving to meet those updated technologies, and that's a big challenge. It's also a big opportunity. But one takeaway I would put out there is that this requires ongoing funding throughout the lifespan of your project. Going into it, I naively thought that we could, put a bunch of money up front to build the app, and then we were going to have this great tool, and the rest of our budget we could really focus on implementing and collecting data and analyzing data. No, you have to keep funding that development, because technology changes and evolves, and you don't necessarily have any control over that.
I would say the one thing that we learned is that the birding community, they're pretty serious about what they do. So I think we just sort of assumed that we stood up a data warehouse and back up your truck and just share your stuff here. And then, of course, when there was just crickets at the loading dock, we started reaching out to various groups that had data. And there are just so many different concerns that different groups have. And I would just say the birding community that we interacted with, felt that the identification of the location of specific species of birds is much more serious than, let's say, HIPAA. And so, I think we've had to learn a lot of humility along the way, that, people value data differently for different reasons. And, it's just not obvious that, we're all going to have the same criteria for how it's released, how it's shared, and how it's used.
Thank you all. I like when people share their failures and their challenges, because I think it's a great learning experience for everyone else. And that's the whole point of our webinar series, is to share. So one of the questions that's come up a few times throughout other talks and other panels in our series is machine learning and AI, and how does that complement citizen science? How does that maybe diminish citizen science, maybe make citizen science obsolete? And so I'm curious, kind of on the technology side of things, and just thinking about how it complements each other and your opinions of that. But I'm also thinking more about, how does machine learning, AI, and also other new technologies actually support other parts of citizen science, like broadening participation, enhancing data quality, improving project design and project evaluation. But maybe we can just start with just what your opinions on particularly machine learning, AI, and then also other new technologies, and how it complements, how maybe it diminishes citizen science, how does it support citizen science?
I'll take a shot at the what are the challenges with machine learning. I think facing community, right, where you have people of different ages and different kinds of backgrounds, I think our experience has been there's a heavy amount of concern and distrust that, what happens with the data. So, our story was built on a trust problem about data. Or that trust problem gets so much worse when then I do something that I can't even explain to you how it worked, right? Like when I took my random tree forest algorithm, and then I don't know how it works, but it works. See how it does a good job? And so I think in some ways, we're mostly going in the wrong direction if what you want is translation to the public and public engagement. While that stuff is absolutely fantastic to look at, and it is whiz bang, at some level, we might not be closing all the right loops. And I'll tell you, in our work, we're very focused on trying to close the loop. So if you reported an odor, we're currently in negotiations with EPA, so that they have a next generation sensor that if enough crowd reports come in, it will grab a sample of air and run it through its auto GC. It's never been done anywhere in the United States, and it's never been done starting with a citizen triggered event ever. So from my perspective, when we go around the community and we say, well, if you help us by showing that you're willing to bring your data to bear, what I know the federal government is willing to entertain is letting your reporting trigger a regulatory event, a higher fidelity machine that senses stuff differently than your nose. And then we suddenly get a lot more interest, right? So I feel like, there's a lot of advanced technology out there. I don't think analytics is the end game. I think the end game is connecting it back to the lives of individuals and demonstrating that you're really able to pay a dividend.
And Heather, if I'm thinking of that's a great question. I think in some ways humans will remain in the loop. Citizen scientists, I think, and machine learning can be complementary to one another. Maybe Ved can speak to this. He gave the example of when you have discordance of what the human classifiers are suggesting, then you bring in the machine, right, and it starts doing other things. And you can see that interplay there where the machine is depending on the human classifier, but the same goes the other way, and they can complement each other so that, and if you set up the system in such a way that they're learning from one another, you could also be helping train the humans. So for me, I don't know that I see, a future where citizen science will be completely displaced, especially because at least for me, a lot of the work that I do is around supervised learning. So for me, having a human in play is always valuable, and I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I could just kind of comment on this and say that there's tremendous power with a lot of these machine learning tools, but I feel like a lot of it is sometimes misguided in the value we associate with them and the true power they have. I mean, for as smart as these tools are, they're still designed by people, and they can't do, as of 2020, unless I'm mistaken, there's a couple of machine learning challenges that to a human are still incredibly basic that have not been solved. One is just chair identification. You cannot reliably identify chairs in pictures. A human can. I'm sitting on a kneeling chair, for example, that most machine learning algorithms would not identify as a chair. But to a 3-year-old, that's a chair. I know what that concept is. So those are things, semantic segmentations, that are just not quite there. And the other danger in machine learning, I feel, fortunately, it doesn't cross a lot of our data sets because we're not doing this kind of information, but there are biases that are implicitly written into them. And all too often, these algorithms are used to target folks based on a certain race or a certain height or a certain color. And they just have long-lasting implications. For our particular data sets where we're looking at coral, we don't have that issue, but people are biased. What we've seen is just from their local region, when they classify a data set, they assume that the only things that they're going to see are certain types of corals or certain types of algae. And the reality is that may not be the case. There might be some pretty rare invasive species that are present that most folks would not even think to consider. And that's something that you really need humans in the loop, I think, for the foreseeable future, to keep control on how the tools are used, if they're used to create a biased data set or any discrimination. At the end of the day, I mean, this is still, machine learning is just statistics rebranded. It's something that's been around for a long time. And statisticians have got some great tools to show if your data set has certain biases towards one thing or the other. And I can just say for our project, we are really, really good at detecting breaking waves and sand. And this was a project that was designed primarily for coral detection. But because so much of the data set includes breaking waves and sand, we have a classifier that, just by virtue of how it was trained, is an expert at those classifications to a degree that's shocking. But it's something that, again, is a bias that ended up being built in, not by design, but just by virtue of the fact that it is a machine learning tool that is still in development and people train it.
Everybody articulated a lot of what I'm thinking so well already. But what I'm thinking about in terms of machine learning and citizen science is that, when you use citizen scientists as a computer, sure, the machines can come in and replace some of that. But what you lose out on is the meaning, the human meaning that people derive to the data collection. So if we're looking at Globe Observer, are they going into their community and observing things that are really significant to them because they're monitoring a change or they're trying to understand something in their environment, and that's what goes away. So I think that people will always be a really important part of citizen science.
So we talked about a lot of different technology that we're implementing right now, but I'm really curious what you see in the future, if there's some new technology you're going to integrate into your citizen science project, or maybe some new technology you're going to kind of bring in to complement, some different sensing technology you're going to bring in to complement your citizen science project, or some new data platforms and things like that. So I'm thinking, what's on your horizon for your different projects? What's some new tech that you're looking at in the future here, that you're writing proposals for right now?
Hi, Heather. I guess I'll get us started since I don't really have anything very impressive in that regard. But one of the things that we discovered when we started doing the intramural competition was just the challenges of how do you do it. We didn't have a platform to host the competition, and we ended up with 20 different, about 19 different players that were competing over 9 different teams, and we ended up having to get access to virtual machines, and it was just kind of ad hoc. And so one of the things that I'm really pushing for through different groups internally is for us to have basically a platform where we can have an easy to use in case there's other people who are thinking of hosting not only citizen science and like other things internally before they go public, things like ideation, or if they're thinking of something even harder like hardware, or if they're just thinking statistical modeling that is not necessarily machine learning. So at least for me, one of the things that I'm really hoping to contribute to, at least within our agency, is to develop something that could eventually be shared with the public and other feds, where it could facilitate having these types of things before it goes out public. Because as probably a lot of you guys know, when you go public and if you've not beta tested your data or the algorithms or whatever solution you're asking for, you may end up running into a lot of bugs. So that's kind of what I'm pushing for in the next few years. Thanks.
gamers are notoriously scathing in their first reviews of something. And so we, having worked with a game team right out of school, we were really cognizant that the game had to be incredibly well beta tested and polished beforehand. So we ended up doing an internal, 1.5-year beta. And fortunately, we have a 5-star review in the App Store for kind of hundreds of users, but that wasn't, by chance. It was kind of intentional. So I'll let Ted go, and then I can say where we're going next.
All right. Well, thank you for the prompt. So we're working on this thing that, if you know the Star Trek tricorder, that was a sort of all the rage. Like, it's a hard problem. What's the one thing you can put on the human body and diagnose everything? Well, we have this dual axis tricorder we're trying to work on, which is essentially to simultaneously measure your physiological status and your environmental exposure. And so there is no framework today that integrates those in real time. And so we often do what I think of as sloppy science, because we're usually really over elaborate about one aspect, so called the gut microbiome. But then we really forgot to track what you were eating for the last month. And so then we don't really learn as much as we could about the gut microbiome. And so we're really excited about this dual facing sensing approach, where we're really trying to get the rubber meeting the road and look for real-time dynamics between physiological systems and environmental variables. So I think that that'll be more than enough work, for the rest of my life. So I'll be fine.
I was on a project during my postdoc that would have loved to have something like that. We were looking at heat vulnerability in low-income folks and homeless people in Phoenix, Arizona. So having something that can do dual monitoring would have been wonderful. So let me know when that comes out.
I'll let you know as soon as I finish. Yeah, it'll be in a couple months.
So I've been really intrigued by some of the stuff that Ted has been saying about community, because I think that's going to be a really important area of growth for us. Globe Observer has been a very top-down program where you're going out and collecting data for NASA Earth Science, and you're supporting NASA, and you send your data into black box, and there it goes. And we look at it in the aggregate, and your individual observation you never really hear about again. So looking forward, we're looking to develop tools that would allow more community-based monitoring. So a community is able to use those tools to create meaning in their own community for things that are significant to them. For example, we're working on implementing a system where a scientist could put in a data request into Globe Observer and send that location into the community and request that people take data at those locations, and then create a team so that they can work together to monitor their environment and come to some conclusions. So it's a much more community-based experience rather than an individual experience where you're going out and doing something for NASA and you never hear about it again. So I think that will be a really important area of development for us going forward.
Sure. Our latest implementations that we're excited about, we've added augmented reality, so you can, especially now when everyone's sort of going a little stir crazy at home, you can dive a virtual reef in your living room, and the fish start populating the living room, and you can move around as if you're snorkeling with your iPad or other device. And that's been really exciting, I think, for people to kind of get out. On the other end, in sort of proposed work, we're really excited about a collaboration with NOAA. NOAA's been doing these long-term coral reef monitoring surveys for a long time, and crucially, they're an agency that implements policy changes. And so to see our work being used directly to say, okay, we don't want to do fishing in this one area to let this reef recover, or this was the impact of the storm, that for us is tremendously powerful to see science being turned into policy and sensible management. And then just the other thing that we'd love to see in the future, and I'm looking forward to more projects adopting, are the 3D experience, being able to show data sets in 3D. We have found that to be crucial in distinguishing different features, and it's how the human brain works so well at distinguishing objects. If you just Google, Chihuahua versus blueberry muffin or bagel versus sleeping dogs, you will find that these are 2D problems that are not solved, but the only way to solve them is with 3D data sets where you can then distinguish these textures. So we're looking at trying to apply our technology to data sets from Mars, from the moon, looking for other signs of potential extant or previous life forms on different planets. That's something that you really kind of need a 3D data set to address. So we're excited about that.
Wow, Heather and panelists, what a great conversation. And it's fascinating to me how here with a panel that's really focused on the new technology, a lot of the really interesting thorny problems that everyone's dealing with are really human problems. And some of the biggest inspirations for new ideas, like Ted's, was actually a conversation with a human being about a need or about an issue and a challenge. So it's great for me as a longtime fan and worker in the world of citizen science to know that there's a strong place for citizens to remain in the practice of citizen science, even if there are some new and exciting tools that might engage new communities or give us new resources as we try and answer thornier problems. So let's open up our conversation and take some questions from the audience.